Hey guys, this task that I'm going to ask you guys to do is sort of an informal way of proving that you're solving an equation correctly, and it's sort of an introduction to some of the logic that we'll be using later in the year when we get into geometry concepts. So hang with me, and you're going to need to take some notes, and I think you'll do a great job. So you might wonder, okay, what is the proof process when it comes to algebra? Well, you're basically going to be given a problem or a statement, right? That's why we said it was given. And you're going to do a T-chart. That's what I'm going to ask you. That's how I'm going to ask you to kind of facilitate the organization of your thoughts. So this whole thing right here is what I call a T-chart. And it's a T-chart because it looks like a T, the red lines do. So basically, this is what was given, right? So you were given this problem, and then a series of steps were conducted. As you can see, there were 4 steps, all the way until the variable was isolated, and they said that x was 3. But all along the way here, for each step, there were certain properties that allowed the mathematician to perform these operations. So for example, in this first step, they multiplied by 2 on both sides of the equation to get rid of the 2 in the denominator, because the opposite of division is multiplication. And so they used the multiplication property. And that's what I want to go into now, is we're going to take a look at all these different properties that you might need to use to solve an equation. I'm going to ask that you write them down in your journal, and then I'm going to ask you to do a few T-charts. All right, let's give this a try. So these are the properties that you're going to want to write in your journal. And I would say write them all in your journal. It's going to take you probably 5 to 10 minutes to do so. It's going to be worth it, I promise. And I would say that this, I'm going to just kind of circle probably the ones you're going to use the most. I'm just guessing. Probably going to end up using these guys the most in this unit. And sometimes we do these other ones here on the left without even realizing it. We just sort of flip it around. We don't know it's called the transitive property, but the symmetric property, but we know that it's allowed. And so I'm not entirely worried about you memorizing these terms, but I do want you to have, and I forgot to circle the division property, this is important. I do want you to have the ones that I circled, quote unquote, memorized. In other words, you don't need to sit there and memorize that, okay, the addition property is if A equals B, then A plus C equals B plus C. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, I want you to know how they would work in an equation and how you'd use them in an equation to solve for a variable. You don't need to memorize all the details of them, but kind of know generally what they are. These guys on the left, write them down, we'll refer to them, but the ones we've circled are going to be kind of our bread and butter. All right, let's try one. Okay, so here's the one example that I'm going to give you. It says, prove that x equals 4 in this equation. And we can just plug in that x equals 4. So 10 times 4 is 40, minus 2 is 38. That would be one way to demonstrate or show that x would equal 4 in this equation. But when we say prove that x equals 4, we're gonna want to use some of these properties in a series of steps to show that x must equal 4, starting with what's given. So when we start with what's given, it's real simple. We just simply write it down. So we have 10x minus 2 equals 38. And on the left-hand side here, this is the, I guess you could call that, where you're actually doing the math work. And on the right-hand side is where you're giving your properties for your proofs, right? So this would be step 1. And step 1 over here, I'm just going to say it's given. And that's what you're always pretty much going to say on the right-hand side for step 1, because you're just taking given information. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically add 2 to both sides. And when I add 2 to both sides, this negative 2 is going to go away, right? It's going to come to 0. And so when I add 2 to both sides, I end up with step 2 here of 10x equaling 40. And what I did to get to that step was the addition property, right? And I'm going to just abbreviate here because don't have a lot of room. And so what to do next? Well, we need to, remember, we're trying to get x by itself, right? So it's 10 times x equals 40. So right off the bat, we can just sort of look at it and tell x is 4. But how would we algebraically prove that? Well, we would divide both sides by 10. And when you divide the 10x by 10, you end up with just x, because the 10's become 1, and 1 times x is just x, right? So we end up with x equals 4, and that was because of the division property. So the division property. And it's really that simple. I basically just want you to do the steps, write down the properties that allowed you to do those steps. I also want to encourage you, if you want to branch out and try to use one of the other properties that wasn't circled, I encourage you to do so. At the end of the day, because we're solving the equations, taking the most efficient route is kind of what we want to do. But if you end up taking a path that's not necessarily the most efficient, so if you maybe use the symmetric property when you didn't really need to, that's no big deal. I mean, be creative, work with these equations, use all the properties you want to, and we'll kind of work on our efficiency later on. So right now, because it's kind of our first time doing this property thing, feel free to branch out and use as many as you want. But at the end, make sure everything you've done is accurate and makes sense, logical sense. And so we've essentially proven that x equals 4 in this equation. All right. So your job now is just complete a T-chart proof for the problems on the website and go back to the different properties to justify every statement. And good luck to you guys. I know you're going to do great.